Hello, good morning, everyone. Um, Welcome once again to our Saturday morning live talks, the series that we have started last year. And every week we have a guest that is presenting to us topics related to Spiritism, to our beautiful Spiritism. So today, as always, we are going to be starting inviting you all to join us in a prayer before we introduce the guest speaker for today. And we raise our thoughts, thinking about our celestial being, asking for blessings, protection, and guidance, that we may feel the love and light of our Master Jesus with us, and especially today protecting our dear friend Ruby that is going to be talking to us. May we be able to learn and to spread this knowledge to bring more peace in the world, more joy, more hope, especially in those times. Okay, so today we have with us Rudy de Souza. Rudy is a volunteer at Peace and Knowledge Spiritist Center of Orlando and volunteer in various humanitarian causes, bachelor in law from the University of Cuiabá, Brazil. And Rudy is going to present to us a talk related that is named Grieving with All My Heart. Rudy, Rudy, thank you so much for being here with us. Good morning, welcome. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well. Thank you so much for having me. It is a pleasure being here.
Great. So now I'm going to be leaving the screen and leaving you with Rudy.
Thank you so much, Shasada. Hello, everyone. It is a pleasure being here. Like Shasada said, my name is Rudy de Souza. I live in Orlando. I am a member of Peace and Knowledge Spiritist Center. And today is a little different for me. I'm not really used to speaking to a computer. I usually, when I do speak, I speak to a live audience. So I think I'm going to be missing a little bit of that interaction, but we're going to have that towards the end. Today, we are going to be speaking about grief. And I know it is a hard topic. It's something that a lot of people are not comfortable talking about, right? It's something hard to experience as a person. It is hard to deal with somebody who is going through grief themselves. Many times we don't know how to act or how to react to somebody feeling that way or going through such a difficult and hard time in their lives. So we're going to talk about grieving with all of our hearts. And I think it is important to keep in mind that when we love with all of our heart, right? So we are expressing this feeling through our hearts. We're running this through our souls, bringing it out into the world. And it is important to look at grief the same way. And as we talk, we are going to elaborate a little bit more. And hopefully by the end of this talk today, we will have a better understanding of how to deal with grief. Just as a disclaimer, I would like to say that I am not a specialist in grief, right? I'm still learning. And I am also not a specialist in Spiritism. I'm still learning. I was not born in a Spiritist family. I came to Spiritism about five years ago through a time of hard difficulties in my personal life. So Spiritism found me. I didn't find Spiritism, and I fell in love with the teachings. I got to know God under a different light, and my life has truly changed since that moment. So every time I have an opportunity to share something of what I know to others, it is always a pleasure to do so. But it's important to know that, just like probably many of you, I'm still in the process of learning. And I think that the topic today is very pertinent, and it is very important, right? If we look out the world, the entire world is in grief, right? We're all grieving together. It's a collective grief, and it has a lot to do, obviously, with the pandemic, but it has to do with the moment of transition that we are all going together as a planet, right? And Spiritism teaches us that when a planet is getting ready to transition from one type of globe to another, one kind of world to another, there is a moment of great trials, especially when we are going from a world of trials and expiations, which is the case of Earth, to a world of regeneration, which will be our next step. So during that process, there's a lot going on, and there's a lot that has to take place in order for us to make that jump. Because usually when we are all developing spirits in a world, because we both evolve, but sometimes we evolve separately, right? So for a long time, spirits are evolving and transitioning from one world to another. But there comes a time where those two um, intersect, and not only the spirits but the world itself transition into a different kind. And this is what we are doing now. We're all getting ready to do it together, and during those times it is important to get as many spirits ready for that transition as possible. And that's why we see a lot of trials going on, right? If you look out the world, we see that there's wars and natural disasters, and it's all taking place at once, and it feels like we can't catch a break. Once we leave one, we fall into another, and the biggest of them lately is undoubtedly the pandemic, which is causing a mass disincarnation. So there's a lot of people leaving the planet at the same time, and with that there's a lot of people staying behind and suffering with the loss of those loved ones. So with that in mind, I think it is very important to talk about grief, to understand the process of grieving, what is all involved, and how we can better help each other through this moment, right? In normal times, we can always count on somebody else to help us, but in times like this, it feels like everybody's going through the same pain at the same time. So how do we deal with this, right? How do we help each other? And when I think about this, I think about a fable. I'm not sure if any of you have known. It is the fable of the long spoon. So says the story that a man was sent to this palace, and it had this beautiful banquet, and everything looked so delicious. So when he was getting ready to eat that delicious food, the spoons were too long, and as the people in the banquet tried to feed themselves, they couldn't reach their mouths. So that led to rage and anger. And he starts thinking to himself, and well, this must be hell. How am I supposed to feed myself if I can't reach my mouth with this long spoon? Well, right next door, there was another party going on, same kind of food, same kind of spoons, different kind of people. And everybody was happy. And the difference was that in the second banquet, rather than trying to feed themselves, the guests were feeding each other. So it didn't matter how long the spoon was, because they were all feeding one another. And in times like this, it is important that we do that for each other, that we be there for one another. But in order to do that, we have to be able to understand everything that is involved in grieving and how to deal with that, not only for ourselves, but also for people that are surrounding us. And before we speak about grief itself, I would like to talk about something a little different. I want to talk about love, right? Because it is very important for us to understand love and creation and how we evolve and grow as spirits, understand a lot of the key concepts of Spiritism in order for us to better understand and deal with grief. So, if I were to ask you what God is, probably many of you who understand Spiritism would say, well, God is the supreme intelligence, creator of all things, right? It's the definition that we have in the Spirit's book. But in a more simple way of defining God, in a way that everyone would understand, if I ask you what God is, the simplest way of defining God is love, right? And love is something that everybody can understand. And when we think of love, so not only God, the reason of our existence is all love, right? There are different kinds of love. Love is not only that intense feeling that somebody who is passionate about somebody else feel towards each other, right? There are different kinds of love, different levels of love. Uh, there is love for a pet, love for a job. There's love for nature, love for a friend, love to your spouse, your kids, right? So love comes in all different kinds of shapes. And that is important to understand because depending on that kind of love, we feel it with a different intensity, right? The love that I feel for my pet is different from the love that I feel for my spouse, even though I love both of them. But there are still differences. And when we look into Spiritism to get some answers, I would like to bring your attention to the book. This book, it hasn't been translated into English. It could be translated as The Comforter or The Consoler. And on question 322, the author asks, is there a gradation of love within the visible and invisible manifestations of nature? And the answer is undoubtedly, right? This gradation has always existed, as gradual is the position of all beings in the infinite scale of progress. So it's important to start understanding what this means. So if we think about everything that exists in the universe, from the smallest to the biggest, there's a lot of difference between them. So those are the scales of love as well. It varies immensely. So in the expressions of animal life, we observe love in everything, in infinite gradations, from violence to tenderness, in the manifestations of the irrational. And then in humans, love presides over all their existential activities in family and society. So when we're talking about animals or the irrational, and we see the expression, love exists in everything in all gradations from violence to tenderness, it's hard to associate violence and love, right? So what we have to think is to look at it in a different way. So it's not saying that violence equals love. What it's saying that sometimes animals react in violent ways because of love. So one easy way to understand this is to think of a lioness, right? A lioness, when it has its cubs, it shows tender love, right? It cares for the cub, but it also has to feed it. And comes a time that that lioness is going to have to hunt. And that is the violence. And that happens why? Because in this case, it's doing for love of its cub. It has to teach it how to fend for themselves. But as you start to evolve and you get to humans, we start to rationalize love. We start to understand love in a different way, right? And if you look at all the ways that our society is formed and how we interact with others, with our community, everything can be linked to a certain level of love. And it's hard to think about this, but when we look at humans, sometimes we think that some of us behave like irrational animals, right? We do awful things in the name of love and faith, right? If we look out in the world, there are many wars that are done out of faith, out of love for God, but obviously it is a misplaced kind of love. It's the wrong understanding of what love really is. And when we look out in the universe, right, there's love in everything. And this is just a little excerpt of that answer because it gets into a lot more details. It says that you can see love from the smallest particles into the biggest ones. And when you think about that, so when we think about the formation of planets, the formation of solar systems, right, it's one tiny little particle being attracted to another one, being pulled into another one, which is exactly what love is, right? Love is this force that pulls us one to another. And we can see that even in the cosmic dust, when one little speck of dust starts to pull itself towards another one, and with time they start to grow and grow and grow. And before we know, there is a planet, there's a solar system, right, in front of galaxies, and we expand into clusters and we expand into the universe. So if you really think about this, the entire existence of the universe came out of the expression of love from God. So it's important to understand love so we can understand other things, because love is this strong force that enables us to do things, right? Paul wrote in the Bible in Corinthians 13:7, which Corinthians is a beautiful book, right? Especially Corinthians 13. But I just want to focus on a little piece of that. So love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, and endures all things. So when you look at this and you say, okay, so you're telling me the love bears all things and believes all things and hopes all things. So love is kind of naive, right? But it's completely the opposite, right? Love is strength. It's powerful. It enables us to do great things. And one easy way to understand this, the power of love and how it actually acts in our lives, think of a mother, right? They say that there is no pure manifestation of love in this planet, on this planet, as the love of a mother for her sons, for her kids. And imagine that this mother has a child whom she loved very much, but grows up to not be such a good person and ends up behind bars. Well, that mother doesn't love that child any less just because he or she became a criminal. It might actually be the opposite. It might actually love that person even more because they need that extra boost, right? And that mother is able to bear that pain of seeing her child behind bars because of the love that she nourishes for him or her, right? She believes all things. She believes it's possible for her kid, for her child to change. And she hopes that time and depending on her beliefs that God will be able to break through that cover, to crack through everything that is hard, that is surrounding that person in order to get to their soul and transform them. But it is because of this love that this mother is able of enduring the pain of seeing their child that way. And this is just an example of what love can do. There is so much more, right? And I wanted to start with love because I think it's important to understand where this feeling comes from so we can better link it to grief. And interestingly enough, when I was invited to give this talk, I was going through grief myself. And my first reaction was to say, I can't do this, right? I mean, I just cannot do this. That what came to my mind immediately when I got the invitation. But right after that, I heard this voice saying, no, it's the opposite. You need this. You can do this. And I'm going to give a little backstory so you understand where I'm coming from. Back in March, I got a call from a friend and she was frantic on the phone. I couldn't really understand what she was saying. She was crying so hard. So finally understood. She was telling me that 3 of her friends had been in a terrible accident and one of them had disincarnated. And at first, I received that news with a lot of shock. Just could not believe she was telling me that our good friend had died, had left this world. And that was very hard for me to comprehend. So once that wave of shock dissipated, right, I was overtaken by this amount of feelings that I couldn't really understand. You know, I was feeling desperate, you know, I was crying, and I kept thinking to myself, the friend that I loved so much, I will no longer physically see her. I will no longer be able to share moments with her, right? We are not going to make any more memories together. We're not going to be there for each other. Whenever I was having a difficult time, if she was around me, I felt safe. I felt comforted. And in the way that we understand life, I was not going to have that anymore. And that really affected me in a very, very hard way. And it was very confusing for me as well, because ever since I started to study Spiritism, I had this understanding that whenever I went through grief, whenever I suffered the loss of a loved one, it wouldn't hurt the way that it used to hurt before, right? It wouldn't affect me the way that it used to affect me before, because now I have this knowledge that I didn't have before. Now I believe in this all-loving God. I believe in reincarnation, that life doesn't end and that life always goes on, right? And that dying here only means that we're going somewhere else and we will get to continue living. And we're going to do that over and over and over again. So having all this knowledge, I thought that it's going to be easy going through grief, right? Maybe easy is the wrong word. It's going to be easier dealing with the loss of somebody else. And this is not at all what was happening to me, right? I would sometimes go into a different room just so I could cry alone, so I wasn't around anybody. Because I didn't want anybody judging me, saying, hey, aren't you a spiritist? Aren't you supposed to know how to deal with the loss of a loved one? Shouldn't this be easier for you? And it's funny to think about this, but even in our community, right, in the Spiritist community, there are many people that have the wrong understanding of what grief and grieving and mourning the death of somebody means. And more often than we would like to, we hear people saying, well, you shouldn't cry when somebody dies, right? You shouldn't be desperate when somebody dies. You shouldn't feel this way when somebody dies, because this will affect the spirit in a negative way. But what that is just a misunderstanding of the teachings, right? And I hate to say, but I think that for a while, I fell into that. I had this fake understanding, this mistaken understanding that pain wasn't going to affect me the way that did. But it's because I didn't quite understand what it meant. So here I am in the middle of this grieving, missing my friend, thinking about all the things that we're not going to do together anymore, right? Feeling sorry for her family, for her loved ones, for her kids, thinking about how young she was, given into that feeling of sorrow for myself. And I got a call from my sister. My family is in Brazil. And my sister is telling me that my father had a stroke. So I am in the middle of missing my friend, and I got a call from my sister telling me that my father is in the hospital. He had a massive stroke. And then I had all of that come together, and that pain tripled in amount and size and desperation, because now not only I have just lost my friend, I'm thinking to myself, I'm about to lose my father too, right? So I will never again be able to be with my father anywhere, make new memories, tell him how much I love him, hear from him how much he loves me, share the things that we did as I was growing up. I won't have that anymore. And I was overtaken by this despair. So immediately I booked a flight to Brazil, and this is around May now. And when I got to Brazil, it was almost like I had jumped from a frying pan into a burning bonfire, because they were going through one of the waves of the pandemic without any vaccines and a lot of misinformation. So people were also not taking care of themselves and taking precautions. And I hadn't experienced anything like that until I got there. Here was different, right? We heard about a lot of what was going on with the pandemic, but it's almost like it's been kept behind curtains. I hadn't really experienced the suffering that comes with it. But when I got to Brazil, it was very evident what was going on. It was very evident how hard hit the country had been, right? I had already had both of my vaccines, and most people in Brazil hadn't even had one. And they are going through all this pain and all this suffering. And it was so bad that there were days my mother would lose 2 of her friends. So now here I am. I'm filled with grief. I decide to go to Brazil because I want to comfort my mom and I want to comfort my family. And I found myself not able to do any of that. I felt like I was just piling up all this grief onto myself. And I started to question a lot of things. So in the middle of all that that suffering and that pain and that confusion of not being able to console my mother, and I could see that she was trying to console me, but we weren't really able to do that for one another. So I decided to pull out the Spirit's book, the audio version. Now, mind you, my parents are not Spiritists. They've never studied the doctrine, the teachings, and my father for the longest time didn't even believe in God. So now I'm trying to share this with them because I thought it was the easiest way to console them and to console myself, was to immerse myself in the teachings of Spiritism and see if I could get the answers for all these questions that I had. And as we started to listen to the book, and we did that quite a lot. My parents, they live on a farm, and there wasn't anybody there. It was just the 3 of us. As we are listening and talking about the teachings, I started to get the answers for many of the questions that I had. And I started to find myself in a place of peace and calm. And then it all made sense to me. You know, the comfort that comes from the teachings of Spiritism, how we are able to find comfort and also able to console somebody else with the things and the knowledge that we have from the doctrine. And I was filled with gratitude. So I came from this place of a lot of pain and a lot of suffering and a lot of confusion to this place of gratitude and thankfulness. I was so grateful that I had the opportunity of sharing Spiritism with my parents. I was grateful of how well they received it, and above all, how much my father loved it. Somebody who never really believed in anything, right? For my father, nature was God. And once we closed our eyes to this life, that was it. And here, this man that was in a certain way faithless towards God just soaking up all of this and really interested in learning. So out of my biggest pain, I had one of my greatest joys, and that was given to me through Spiritism. And many of the questions that I had, right? So questions like, why does grief hurt so much? Or does everyone grieve? Do spirits grieve, right? Is there a right and a wrong way of grieving? How long should it last? And what should I say to a grieving person, right? What can we say to somebody who's going through this kind of pain? And what does Spiritism do for those who grieve, right? For somebody who's going through the pain of losing somebody. And it is important to, I would like to note something here too. Grief is not only related to the loss of somebody. We can grieve many different things. Just like love has a different spectrum, a large spectrum, so does grief. We can grieve the loss of a job. We can grieve the death of a pet. We can grieve the loss of our spouses when we get a divorce, right? So, and obviously we grieve the loss of people who are dear to us, whom we love very much, and this is the hardest type of grief. But it's important to understand that people go through different types of grief as well. But before we get into all of these questions, it's important for us to recall some of the key principles and teachings and concepts of Spiritism. And I think that by doing that, we'll be able to better understand how Spiritism helps us and how we can better deal and cope with the feeling of losing somebody that we love. Okay, so it is important for us to understand the key concepts of Spiritism, and I'm going to focus on two of them only because there are many. If we were to talk about this, we would spend years and years and years here, and we would not even make a dent. I've been studying Spiritism for 5 years, and I feel like I don't know anything. And I can say I don't know much. We need to understand why reincarnation is so important, right? What kind of world Earth is, and we talked about this a little bit about already. And especially, we have to have clear the threefold nature of man in order to understand death and to understand grief. So the two concepts of Spiritism that I am looking for is the immortality of the soul and reincarnation. So when we think about the immortality of the soul, from the moment that we are created as a spirit, simple and ignorant, right? We will never die. We will live forever. So we will never stop existing. And that is very important to know. From the moment we are created by God through all eternity, we will never stop existing. And that is a great comfort to know that life is all there is, right? And why is reincarnation so important? So if we are already created immortal, if we are going to live forever, and we are created by this supreme being that is all love and all intelligence, why do we need reincarnation? Why is it important to go somewhere and experience life in matter, right, in the flesh? Well, reincarnation serves a great purpose because it teaches us, right? It gives us equality and equity so we can learn. It gives us the tools to learn for ourselves, right? So we can value things. So we truly understand what it means to be alive, what it means to have life. If we were created and given everything there is to know, what would the purpose of life be, right? I find this very interesting because I hear people all the time saying, well, what is the purpose of life? And that to me is very clear, right? The purpose of life, I never doubted what the purpose of life is. And that actually became clearer to me once I started to study Spiritism. And I'm not getting this from any book or any teachings, so this is something personal, right? So I'm sharing with you how I see the purpose of life. I think that the purpose of life is to love, to learn, to evolve, right? We are created to learn, to evolve, and to get to know creation itself. And that takes a long time, and that takes a lot of work, right? It takes all eternity to do it. So we never really stop learning and experiencing different facets of life in the matter, or life as a spirit. And it is through reincarnation that we learn how to relate to one another. We learn our virtues, and we learn how to rid ourselves of the vices that we have. And it is through living one life after the other that we start to add to us all the layers that we need to start developing as a spirit. And one way to really understand this is think back when we were talking about the creation of the universe, right? That one particle is attracted to the other and they start to come together to form a planet. So imagine that the spirit works the same way. So we are created as a little speck, and we start to add speck and speck and speck after that to those layers. So let's imagine that each one of those little specks is a life that we live, right? And every time that we add a little bit to us, we start to grow. And so our purpose is to grow from a little speck into a planet, into a solar system, right? To a constellation, into a galaxy, into a cluster, into a universe. So there is a universe of growth awaiting for us. And that takes time, and that takes a lot of work. If you think in terms of a planet, Earth is 4.5 billion years old, and it's just now changing from a world of trials and expiations, which is the next topic here, to a world of regeneration. So it takes a lot to do that. We can't do any of that in one lifetime. It takes one lifetime after another. So reincarnation serves that purpose, right? It teaches us all the virtues that we have to learn. It teaches us how to be appreciative of the things that we are given and the opportunities that we have. Teach us compassion and love for one another and love for ourselves as well. So what kind of world is Earth? Well, right now, Earth is a world of trials and expiations, right? And what does that really mean to say that Earth is a world of trials and expiations? It means that on this planet, there is a lot of suffering and there is a lot of pain. So there's nobody on this planet that has happiness in the absolute form, right? We have momentary happiness, but we don't have absolute happiness here because we're all experiencing pain. We're all going through suffering. We're all experiencing hardships. And that happens because that is one way that we learn as spirits, as beings evolving, right? There are three simple ways, if we were to break it down in a very simple way of explain learning. We can learn by love, we can learn by pain, or we can learn by suffering. So love is when we are presented with something and we embrace that and we don't give any pushbacks and we learn from it out of our goodwill, right? We accept and we embrace it and we move along with it. Well, when we put a lot of resistance into something, then we are gifted with pain, right? Pain can be a gift. It's not punishment. God doesn't punish. God only loves, right? So the pain that we experience in our lives, the suffering that we experience in our lives, it's not punishment for what we've done. No, it's because we had the opportunity to learn and we didn't, that we have to go through that stage of teaching, kind of like a child who is ill, right? If the child has a cold and the parent is trying to give them the medicine, but the child is refusing and the parent has to force that into the child. It's not doing that just so that the child can experience the bitterness in the medicine. That is not the purpose. It's the opposite. It's giving the child that bitterness so the child can be better. So it's giving life into the child. And it's the same way with pain. Pain works as medicine for our souls. When we resist growth, we are given challenges, and it is through those challenges that we are able to evolve. And if we resist even the pain that we are given, then we are given more pain in the form of expiations, right? More suffering. So when we don't learn through love, we learn through pain, or we will ultimately learn through suffering. And in a world of trials and expiations, there's a lot of that. So everyone here, right, everyone on this planet will be going through the suffering, through the pain, and through the trials and challenges of becoming a better spirit. And then what is the three-folded nature of man? It is important to understand that we are, as humans, right, as man, we are made of body, perispirit, and soul. So the body would be our material side, right? It's the part that you can touch, the matter, the part that you can experience. And then the soul is the ephemeral side of us, right? It's the part that is immaterial. It's the spirit. It's who we are, right? And then when we are experiencing life, living, we have to put the body and the soul together. And in order to do that, we use the perispirit. So the perispirit is the link between the material body that I am now and the soul that I am always. So as man, we have a three nature, a threefolded nature, three objects, right, that makes us. So body, perispirit, and soul. And this is very important to understand so we can understand grief better, right? So with all of this that we just saw, if I were to ask you, do we really die? Right? It's something to think about then. Do we really die? Well, if we have been studying Spiritism, and if we are a Spiritist, our first instinct is to say, no, we don't die, right? We live forever. We are immortal. If I were to be asking this question to somebody who doesn't have any kind of religious beliefs, that person would say, yes, we die. Once we die, that's it. But what we really have to understand is that the answer is a little more complicated than that, right? Because the answer is yes and no. Yes, we die, right? And yes, we live forever. So no, this is not the end. And when we look at the threefolded nature of man, that becomes very clear. So we know that we have a material side and we are a spirit. Well, the material side will die. So that will come to an end. And when we grieve, that's what we're grieving, right? We're grieving the person. We're grieving the body. We're grieving the experience that we had. So I, spirit, live forever. I will never stop existing. But the person that is talking to you today, so Rudy, the person I am now, this person has an end. This person will die. So this body will one day stop to exist, right? So the stories that I lived, the people who I related to, the places that I've visited, and the life that I built. So all of this will come to an end. One day I will die and I will stop to exist. So I will no longer be making more memories as Rudy de Souza. I will no longer be looking at the world the way that I look at the world now, right? So this will certainly end. And when we grieve, that's what we're grieving. We're grieving the death of the person. And this is something that I was missing when I was grieving my friend, right? I forgot that the reason why it hurts so much, it's because she really stopped existing in this life, right? So that body, that spirit used to be who it was here, that body is gone, right? It has been laid to rest. So we are not going to be making memories together anymore as myself and her in this lifetime, right? I'm not going to have her physically next to me again. Whenever I have a challenge here, she's not going to be here to comfort me. We're not going to have conversations. We're not going to laugh together anymore, and we're not going to cry together anymore as people, as humans in this lifetime. So that chapter has come to an end. And when that happens, that hurts, right? Because we miss that physical contact. We miss the person. All that love that I had inside myself that I used to direct to her, I can't do that anymore. Not physically speaking, right? I can think of her spiritually. I can remember the things that we did together, the memories that we created, but I can't experience a hug, right? She can't wipe my tears. She can't comfort me or console me in the way that she did as a person. And this is very important to understand. Death is real, right? It's real for the body, it's real for the person. So death is real to me. One day I will die. I, spirit, will never die. The memories that I made, my story, that will live on, right? It will continue to add layers to who I am as, or to what I am as a spirit. But that one chapter, the experiences that I had, I will never, ever again have it the same way that I did in this lifetime. And that hurts when you think about something stopping to exist, right? It takes time for us to adjust to all the suffering that comes from losing someone, from death, right? But once we have this clear, it's easier to understand why grief hurts so much, right? Why it takes a long time for us to get through all of this. So again, why does grief hurt so much? Well, it hurts the way it did because before there was grief, there was love, right? And that's why it's important to grieve with all of our hearts, right? Because we love with all of our hearts. When that love is unable to flow out of us into the person that it used to flow into, we suffer a blockage, right? It hurts. It's really painful. And that's why it hurts. If there was no love, there would be no pain, right? And the more you love someone or something, the more you're going to suffer the loss of that person. So very simple, right? I love, therefore I grieve. If there was no love, there would be no grieving. But because of our nature, because of who we are, and especially because of what pain and suffering can teach us, right? It is important for us to know how to deal with the loss so we are able to comfort those who will one day be going through a loss that is similar to ours, which is very important to understand that we don't experience grief the same way. right? We all experience it differently. And it is very important to know that somebody going through a process of grieving someone or something, for that person, that pain, that loss is the worst thing there is in the world, right? Because we're not experiencing it through their eyes, we don't see it that way. But it's important for us to understand that for the person suffering the loss of a loved one, the loss of a child, the loss of a parent, of a friend, that pain they're suffering at that moment, it is the worst pain there is in the world. And we have to be able to understand that, so we are better capable of comforting and consoling someone who is in need of that. Now, does everyone grieve? We kind of already answered this question, right? We are in a world of trials and expiations. Pain is very, very real here. Suffering is very real here. So if we are experiencing life on earth, we all grieve, all of us, right? So nobody will go through this planet, through a lifetime on this planet without experiencing grief. And if you look at the Spirit's book, right, for another answer, we find on question 934, so Allan Kardec asks, is the loss of those who are dear to us a legitimate source of sorrow, as this is both irreparable and independent of our will? Pay attention to this, irreparable, right? Meaning that once we lose someone, there's nothing we can do to bring that person back to life. And again, we're talking about the person, not the spirit, right? So we're talking about Rudy, not I, as what I really am, right? A being of creation that is meant to live forever. So the answer that Allan Kardec gets is, this cause of sorrow, from which neither the rich nor the poor are safe, is either a trial or atonement. Neither the rich nor the poor are safe. This is very important because it's telling us that everyone, independently of who you are, your social status, your race, where you grew up, where you're from, what you've done, good or bad, everybody will experience grief. We will all go through this pain, right? And nobody is excused from it. Now, what about spirits? Do spirits grieve, right? If I, spirit, know that I live forever, and now that I'm free from that body, because if you really think about it, the body is a prison for the spirit, right? While it's incarnate, while it's in the body, it can't really do much. It's limited to that. So it should be a moment of happiness to finally free ourselves from matter and be able to go wherever we want and be errant spirits again, right? Meaning travel free through the universe. So do they grieve? Yes, they do. They also experience grief. Yeah? And why is that? It's kind of for the same reasons that we go through. So on one hand, as spirits, we're happy to be back to the place we're meant to be. But we just shared a life with many other spirits in the flesh, right? And we made memories and we had families. And many times when a spirit leaves the incarnate life, it grieves for the pain that the people whom they loved are feeling, right? The ones who are left behind. So a father living this life will, as a spirit disincarnating, will grieve the kids that are left behind, right? The friends that are left behind, the memories that it made. So it knows that none of that will happen again. And that it is hard. It's hard to say goodbye. So it happens on both sides, on the material world and also as a spirit. And there's a very interesting book. I actually, it's one of my favorite books. I have read it many times. Unfortunately, it has not been translated into English, or at least I have not been able to find it in English. It's called Letters from a Dead Woman, and it was written in 1935. It was psychographed by Maria João de Deus, and it was psychographed by Chico Xavier and dictated by Maria João de Deus. So Chico Xavier, for those who don't know, was the biggest medium Brazil has had, and one of the biggest mediums in the world. Right, he is responsible for bringing Spiritism to many, many, many countries. Wrote over 400 books, and has blessed us with a lot of teachings. So after his mother disincarnated, she dictated a book through him, which is Letters from a Dead Woman. And in that book, she talks about the pain of living, of leaving this world. She talks about the pain of disincarnating, finding herself in a spirit, and not being able to comfort and console her friends, right? She talks about feeling all the love that everybody was expressing to her during the services of her funeral. She talks about the experience of being on the other side, but above all, she talks about how difficult it was for her to leave her loved ones behind, especially her smaller children. When she died, Chico Xavier was 5 years old, so she had very, very small kids, little ones that she left behind, right, with her husband, to take care of 9 kids. So it was very hard for her. And she said that at first she experienced a lot of sadness and a lot of pain, and she was unable to see all the other things that were going on around her. So as she gets through the book, she explains that now that she had spent some time in the spirit world, she knows that during all of those times, there was never a moment that she didn't have divine providence, that she didn't have a group of spirits taking care of her and offering her comfort and offering her love and assistance. But because she was so deep into her own grief for having left her family and her loved ones behind, she was unable to see all the goodness that was around her, all the love that was all around her. And one of the most beautiful moments is the moment that she describes feeling the presence of somebody in the place where she was and not really being able to see who was there until she heard a voice that was very familiar to her. And when she turned around, she saw her mother materializing to herself. So the spirit that had been her mother on this planet came to her, right? And she describes the joy of seeing that, of being around that. And so she says that her mother looked at her and said, "Come, Maria, come to my arms and rest your spirit. Let me wipe your tears and bring you peace and bring you comfort." Right? Imagine what a beautiful moment that must have been, right? And we are all going to go through that one day. We're all going to experience the joy of leaving this body, going to the other side, and being welcomed by those who loved us and who were part of many of our stories here. But that doesn't mean that goes without pain, right? But we have to work through that pain. And the same way that it happened to her in the spiritual world, it happens to us here. Sometimes we are so immersed in our grief and in our pain that we are not able to see all the good that is happening around us, right? All the gifts that come from that pain. And many times we are actually unable to understand why it is that we are going through such a pain and such a loss. And that has to do with the fact that it's because we had that much love, right? It's because that we had that much care. That's why it hurts so much. So not only us in the material world, but us in the spirit, we all go through this pain. And the more we understand this, the more those things are clear to us, and the reasons behind them, we are able to console and comfort each other, right? Now, what about how we should grieve? Is there a right and wrong way to grieve, right? How long does it last? Is there like a certain number of months or years that we should allow ourselves to go through that pain? And what should we say to somebody who's going through that experience right now? Well, the first thing that we have to understand is that there is no right and wrong way to grieve, right? We all experience it in different ways, and it is important to understand that and to have it very clear, because the experience that I will have from grieving the loss of a loved one will be completely different from the experience that you might have from going through the same loss. And if I'm able to understand that, if that is clear to me, I will be better able to accept your pain, right? A lot of times we have this concept, and I guess you could say that grief demands judgment, right? Meaning that we are many times judging how somebody else is reacting to pain, and it should be the opposite. We shouldn't be able. I mean, we shouldn't judge or hold others to our patterns of dealing with pain and suffering. An easier way to understand that is to think of a couple, right, who lost a child. So the father might react to the loss of that child by immersing himself in work and keeping himself busy and doing all kinds of other things. And the mother, because of the relationship that she had with that child, might do it in a whole different way and might feel that pain more profoundly, right? In a way that she is expressing that through a lot of tears and a lot of suffering, right? And sometimes even through depression. So we have to be careful about not judging how those two people are grieving, because we might look at it and say, well, the father didn't really love his child. The mother really loved her child. And when in all reality is not at all what's happening. It's just that they have different ways of dealing with that pain. And that has to be clear to us. So we can't judge how somebody is reacting to the loss of somebody, either if that person is crying too much or crying too little. That is only a misconception of the way that we are looking into that, because we really don't know how that person is feeling inside or how that is really affecting that person, right? So we all do it differently. And there is no set time as to how long we are allowed to grieve. It happens differently to different people, right? Some people are better about dealing with this and accepting the loss of somebody, and others are not. And some people will never stop grieving. They will grieve for as long as they are alive. So what we have to understand is that there comes a time that grief can turn into something different, right? Something that can be harmful to ourselves. And that is something that we have to be able to either see for ourselves or see into others, so we are able to help them, because that pain can lead to depression, right? Can lead to moments of despair that could lead to even suicide. But if we are able to see that into somebody else, on other people, sometimes we're able to help them through that, right? And what should you say when somebody is going through a moment like this, right? How can you comfort them? How can you console them? Well, there's really no right answer to this, and it varies from person to person, right? First, the few things that would work for everyone is as a friend, as somebody who cares, right? You can offer your presence, you can offer your friendship, you can offer your understanding, your compassion, your love, right? You can just let the person know that you are there for them, whether they want to talk, whether they just want you to sit next to them, right? So they feel a presence of love. whether they want you to wipe their tears or even if they just want to be alone. We have to be able to respect those moments of pain, right? Some people, when they're experiencing pain, they don't like to be around other people. They don't like to talk about their feelings and their emotions, and we have to be able to understand and respect that. But the one thing that we can do for everyone is to let them know that they don't have to go through that alone, that you are here to help them through it without any judgment, just with a lot of love, right? And we offer that compassion according to the way the person going through the loss is willing to receive it. And it has to be free of judgment, and it has to be filled with love, right? And as a person who is going through grief, we have to first of all have clear in our minds that crying or feeling sad or having moments of desperation or not being able to get through your day for a long time, that doesn't mean that we are weak, right? It doesn't mean that we are not capable of overcoming that challenge. What it means is that before all of those feelings, there was a lot of love that used to be directed somewhere, and now we cannot give that love physically in the way that we used to do before. And that will have a great impact on us, right? And will leave us sometimes desperate. But another thing that we have to keep in mind is that there will come a day, 2, 3, 6 months, 2 years, right? That we're going to be able to find gratitude again. And it's not forcing gratitude, right? It's not forcing gratitude out of your self while you're suffering. And it's not gratitude for the person who died, because there is no gratitude in death, right? There is no meaning in death in the way that some people perceive it. But there is gratitude in the experience, that is gratitude in the person that left, right? So we can be grateful for the life that we got to share with that spirit, the experience that we had with that spirit in this lifetime, the memories that we made, the laughters that we shared, the tears that we wiped for each other, right? The moments of comforting and consoling one another through difficult times. That's where the gratitude is. And that will come when the time is right. That will come when the pain has given away to a place where it doesn't hurt as much. That doesn't mean forgetting, right? We never forget. We will always remember those who were important to us. But it makes easier for us to deal with the absence and focus on the memories, right? On the moments of joy, on the moments that brought us happiness, right? So I have to focus on the gift that I got to be the father of John, right? The spouse of Mary. So these are the things that will one day start to fill our hearts, and then we'll be able to find meaning, right? To give ourselves different purposes, different meanings. And there will come a day where we will be able to honor the memory of that person and the existence of that person, or the life that we got to share together. And that can happen in many ways, right? How many charities are born out of pain? How much good is done in the world, right? Out of the death of somebody. Because it comes a time where all that love that he used to direct and to funnel into that spirit, into that person, you can't physically do it anymore, but it has to go somewhere, right? So what we do is, in order to honor them, to remember them, to cherish them, we channel that love out into the world, and we do great things for many people, right? If we look out and see all the charity warriors out there, all the people doing good and fighting for a cause, many of them, behind that act of kindness, behind that work they are doing, there is a story of pain, there is a story of suffering, but they were able to allow themselves to feel that grief with all of their hearts, right? Up to the moment where they were now able to channel that love out into the world. And they're able now to make a difference in the memory of those whom they loved. So blessed are they who weep, for they shall be comforted. Right? It's what we talked about. When we experience pain, when we live through pain, not only we are blessed with those who can comfort us, right? But we are also better able to comfort those who need us. And in a moment like today, in the world that we're living today, we have to be able to do it for each other, right? We have to be able to comfort one another. So as I am dealing with my pain, I sometimes am able to help those who are dealing with their own pains. So we have to think of the story that we talked about in the beginning, right? The story of the long spoons. Sometimes we can't feed ourselves, but we can feed each other. And this is what we do for those who are grieving around us, right? We have to share some of ourselves with them, give them understanding, give them love, and give them space, right? Give them space to be able to work through their pain and through their suffering. And most of the times, the best thing we can do is to be present for them, right? And not to force anything, and to accept their pain and their grief in the way that they are able to express it into the world. But what about Spiritism, right? So what does Spiritism do for those who grieve? Well, it does everything we talked about, right? It gives us comfort, it gives us meaning, it teaches us how to be there for somebody and what to expect. And it allows us to understand that life doesn't actually end, but that yes, there is pain. The pain comes from the material experience that we have now, right? The little grain of sand that we are adding to ourselves that will one day help us to become the universe that is within us. So Spiritism, in a few words, right? It softens the bitterness of life's sorrows and it calms the soul's desperation and agitation. And if there's one thing that we can all take out of this lecture today, this moment that you guys allowed me to share this experience with you, is that love is the one feeling, love is the one thing, right, that can break all barriers of existence, right? That can shatter all separations between death and life. It is through love that we are all connected to one another for all eternity. So love each other, love the world, love their lives, but allow yourself to also grieve with all your hearts. I hope you have enjoyed the talk today. It's been a pleasure being here. You have a wonderful weekend.
Oh, thank you so much, Rudy. That it was really important for the times we have been living. And although we know that loss and pain in this sense has always been present in the world, um, nowadays in a more collective way, we are all feeling this so much, and even the energy of the pain and burdens that each and everyone have to go through. We have one person that was actually following us today here, Paula. She mentioned about the passing of her husband and how hard it was for her to cope at the beginning, and now thankfully she has the understanding of spiritism, and she's capable of feeling the presence of her husband next to her, of even receiving some communication from him, which is actually great. And so thank you so much for also for sharing your own pain with us. Like you said, we cannot look around and believe that there is someone that is not going through something. And there are so many different types of laws uh, that we all can be experiencing in this moment, that can be as important as well, and actually impact people in different ways. We still have time to bring one or two questions. Let's see here what we have. So we have this question from Freddie. How should we cultivate love in our heart when you had been through hell in your life? When many people were suffering of hunger or disasters like Haiti?
Well, I guess the simple answer to this is go after them, right? That's how we cultivate love in times of difficulties. So if we are seeing the hungry, we feed them. If you're seeing the sick, we care for them. So love is not something that is stagnant, that it stays put in a place. Love is something that is meant to be given and to be shared. So where there is suffering, there is love to be given. So all of the suffering that we see in the world, we can't just look at that as being punishment, because that is far from being punishment, right? We all have a story. And we can't look at our lives as being this one life only. There are a multitude of lives behind, and we are all here learning the lessons that we need in order to progress. So maybe being hungry, being cold, or going through suffering, or being a person who lives in a place where war is very prevalent, is the lesson that I need in order to continue progressing as a spirit, so I can one day, evolve enough to know God as the creator, as God is really meant to be known, because we are still far from that. So, Freddie, what I have to tell you is, wherever you see suffering, wherever you see famine and things that, show pain and despair, you go there and you plant a seed of kindness. You bring food to those who need, you give shelter to a homeless, you visit somebody in the hospital that doesn't have anybody to take care for them. So those are not reasons to look at the world and see the world as a horrible place. It's completely the opposite. Those are opportunities for us to look into the world and put in practice what Jesus taught us, and love, and just immerse yourself into that. So next time you see somebody suffering, don't look at it as punishment, but look at this as an opportunity that God is giving you to show love to somebody who might be actually looking into the world and not experiencing that. So you have the power to change that person's perception of what the world is.
That's wonderful. And while you were talking, I was remember that passage, from Jesus, that some people came and asking, to help and to be with Jesus, and he said, whenever you are doing something for your brothers and sisters, appeasing their hunger, and covering them, all of that, you are doing this to me. So sometimes we want so much to connect with Jesus, and with the good spirits, with the good things, with the higher levels of life, and we forget that the best way for us to do that is through service, is through really caring for our brothers and sisters. We have one more question, so let's bring this one from Adriana. How to help a student who lost a mother and has a different religion?
Well, that is a hard thing to do, right? because one of the ways that you can comfort and console somebody is to focus on the spirituality. But if somebody doesn't believe in God or doesn't have a religious background, that becomes a little more difficult. So what you can do is be there for the person, right? So you don't focus on what you would with somebody who has religious beliefs, but you focus on the person themselves. So you show that student that you are there for her, that you are not just a teacher in a classroom, that there's more to you than just that, that you're not only there for 4 or 5 hours a day to coach her through some knowledge and through some stages of life, but that after the classroom, you're still present in their lives. Because what children or people that are suffering need is love, right? Need kindness. So you have to show that student that you really care, that you are there for her. So let her know that you are available at any time. It doesn't matter what time it is, 1 a.m., 3 a.m., 5 a.m. If she needs somebody, and if she thinks that you are the only person that can give that to her, make yourself available, right? Charity, comforting, loving, kindness, there is no time for that. We're not on a clock for any of that. We have to serve when the opportunity comes, and the opportunity will knock at any time of the day. So what I can tell you is, let the person know that you are present for her, that the world is not going to be a bitter world because she lost her mom or he lost his mom, but that there is still love to be given, there is still love to be found, and you can help them by sharing a little bit of your love with them. And just being present is the biggest thing you can do in a moment like this for a person who doesn't have any kind of religious or faith background.
Thank you so much. So now we came to the end of our presentation today. And again, we would like to thank you, Rudy, for bringing such thoughtful, you know, uh, such a thoughtful presentation to us today. I'm sure it is going to be helping all of us in this process. We have been receiving so many comments. Thank you as well for this talk. And we would like, if it's possible, for you to do the final prayer for us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me and for inviting me. It's been a pleasure. Dear Father, thank you for the opportunity given to all of us to share together this moment of knowledge and growth and understanding. May your love inundate our souls and help us through difficult moments of pain, moments of sorrow, moments of sadness. And above all, Father, give us the understanding and the gift of seeing all that is good that can be extracted from what we perceive as pain and suffering. May we be able to pour out of our hearts love into the universe, and together walk to a better day. Please bless all of us here and all of our loved ones, and pour your loving and healing through our world that is now going through a moment of transition, but that will lead to a much more beautiful and better tomorrow. And so be it.
So thank you everyone for being with us. Remember that next week we will continue with our program, and we will have our dear friend host of these presentations as well with us. That is Glaucio Pessoa. He's going to be talking about spiritual music. So it's going to be a very interesting topic for us all. So thank you again, and see you next week.